And we're off. Okay. So listen, I'm not going to bore you with some long-winded piece about how wonderful Genos are. I'll just tell you very, very quickly about us. We're a leading emotional intelligence assessment and solution provider, and we've been around since 2002. All I want you to know, just from the perspective of credibility, if you like, is that we are continually winning awards for the quality of our innovation and the solutions we deliver. Most recently, we became one of the top 20 assessment companies in the world, not just the top 20 EI companies in the world, but the top 20 assessment companies in the world in the competition by trainingindustry.com. And we won that this year and last year. Since 2002, we have certified about 7,500 practitioners worldwide. Those are people who work with our solutions. This is me. This is the slide that says I'm absolutely wonderful. The main point that I want to make here is that my general role in Genos is to help coaches, consultants, trainers, and clients of Genos to be successful using our solutions. And that's what myself and Ava essentially are responsible for. As I mentioned earlier, we have certified 7,500 practitioners worldwide since 2002. So there's a good, sizable Genos community out there. And I use the word community advisedly. I might touch on that a little bit later on. Quite apart from the fact, don't get me wrong, we're not all goody two-shoes. We are in business like everybody else. We're in business to make a profit, but we genuinely have drunk our own Kool-Aid in the sense that we do have a genuine purpose, and it's something you see with everybody in Genos and with a lot of the partners that become involved with Genos. We have a genuine aim to create workplaces that people want to be in. Workplaces where people are more considerate, more empathetic, and where people are genuinely engaged. And that's really what drives us and what informs the things we do day to day, like these programs. We have in our social responsibility programs, which serve into advancing that purpose. Recently, we've done several programs like this, like the Mindful Leader, which ran over 8 sessions, the Mindful and Emotional Intelligence Salesperson that ran over 4 sessions. And that little asterisk just tells you that if you're interested in those programs, which ran recently, we have self-paced versions of them that you can sign up for and just ask Ava about them. Today, we're obviously looking at emotional intelligence and neuroscience. And then later in the year, we'll be looking at a 4-part program called Building Resilience to Thrive in a Frantic World, Charismatic Leadership and the Relationship to Emotional Intelligence, and then something very relevant moving into 2020, a kind of do you know where you're going to? And we've developed an app which we're going to be giving away for helping people to clarify their personal vision, build their self-awareness, and harness gratitude. And we do these social responsibility programs in the service, as I say, of that purpose, and to let people know what is it that we do. So you're very welcome to this one today. And today we're going to look at exactly what it says in the title. We're going to look at emotional intelligence and neuroscience from the perspective of people whose responsibility it is to develop that in other people. Now, emotional intelligence has been around since, I guess, 1996 or 1998. I can never remember which, when Daniel Goleman wrote his first emotional intelligence book. And since then, the research has become very broad and very deep. And the bottom line, and you know this, if you're already in any sort of role where you've any interest in developing people, it's highly likely that you're already aware that emotional intelligence is a very, very big mover in terms of people's success. And if I summarize just in 2 sentences from Goleman and the Harvard Business Review, Goleman's research of more than 30 years shows that emotional intelligence is responsible for about 85% of star performance in leaders. And the Harvard Business Review did a meta-analysis of about 20 years of research on emotional intelligence. They said it accounts for about 90% of what moves people up the ladder. And as we work through this session, and I suggested in the title slide that you have a pen and paper ready, because as we work through this session, we'll do an exercise that shows you why that is and gives you a real sense of just how emotional intelligence has already touched your life. In Genos, we've done a lot of work with a lot of clients in lots of different areas. And because we were born on the campus of a university called Swinburne in Australia, we have a lot of case studies and articles and peer-reviewed case studies and so on that show the linkage between emotional intelligence and other desirable end products in the real world. For example, employee engagement. Here's a study that we did with IBM across 2 regions a couple of years ago, where we looked at a large volume of employees. Every one of those bubbles you see on the screen is a group of employees. And we looked at their leaders through the eyes of those employees. Across the x-axis, we're looking at the total EI of the leaders, and up the left, we're looking at the extent to which people are engaged. And this is a finding that has been found in, or has been uncovered by many, many studies. Bottom line, there is a direct link between the extent to which people engage and a person's emotional intelligence. And so what our study showed with IBM was, once people got beyond about the 75 percentile in terms of the level of their EI, the people who worked for them and worked around them tended to be very engaged. This was a study we did with Sanofi-Aventis in an area that is not often considered when it comes to emotional intelligence, which is really strange, because sales is one of those situations where if you don't build trust and you don't build relationship and people don't want to deal with you, well, then you're simply not successful. This was a very large sales force with Sanofi-Aventis. They were split into half. Half of them were a control group and they got no training. The other half, which are the blue folks there on the graph, went through an emotional intelligence training program with Genos. And you can see there that after the 9-month mark, that they were up, sales were up, with the group had been EI trained by about an average of 12%. And that's hardly surprising, because, I mean, it's obvious that if somebody turns up in a way that engages you and they're selling you, they're going to be more successful doing that. So the bottom line, and the main thing I want to say to you, is if you go onto Google and you put in performance, success, and emotional intelligence as a search term, please don't do it now. But if you put that in as a search term, you'll get lots of studies like this. The case is made already for emotional intelligence. But suddenly in the last 3-4 years, with the advent of what they're calling the 4th Industrial Revolution, which is the advent and the coming of real, practical, commercial, artificial intelligence systems, suddenly EI has popped to the fore. And the first people really to put it on the map were the World Economic Forum. And a couple of years ago, they published a list that they publish every 5 years, where they published 10 skills that they believe are going to be essential for success 5 years later. So in 2015, they published this list, and they said emotional intelligence, for all of because of all of the things that we see happening in the marketplace with technology, is going to be critical in 2020. And lo and behold, here we are at 2019, and if you go onto the web and you say artificial intelligence and emotional intelligence, you get a gaggle of articles like this one. Articles that say that as we move towards a more artificially intelligent system, where more and more of the interaction that our organizations have with their clients and people in the outside world is undertaken by machines, very frequently unbeknownst to the people who are dealing with those machines, that it's becoming more and more important that we differentiate ourselves on the basis of our humanity, on the basis of our ability to be emotionally intelligent. And this particular one, which is just one example of many dozens of articles out there from the Harvard Business Review, says it's the human capabilities like persuasion, social understanding, and empathy that are going to be the differentiators as artificial intelligence takes over other risks. So my key message is, if you are responsible in any way for developing other people, if you're a coach, consultant, or trainer in-house in an organization, or a coach, consultant, trainer running your own business, helping people to be more successful, prepare for the future, well, then emotional intelligence is something that you have to be looking at. The alternative, of course, to be helping people become more emotionally intelligent is help them become more artificially intelligent. And even though that might appeal to some of the geeks among us, it's not yet a practical option. So right now, if we want to differentiate ourselves, we want to survive and even thrive in an artificially intelligent enabled future, we have to become more emotionally intelligent. Now, when people talk about emotional intelligence, they're often still stuck back with the sorts of definitions that were in Goleman's book in 96, 98. And they're very useful, don't get me wrong. But in a practical sense, understanding what do we mean by emotional intelligence when we talk about things in the real world, in the world you and I live in, where we're working in a very busy environment and where we're required to get results. When we talk about emotional intelligence, what is that? And over the next couple of minutes, yourself and myself, we're going to work together on an exercise for which you'll need a pen and paper. And please do get a pen and paper. It's really important you participate in this and not spectate. I promise you'll get much more value out of the session if you just work through the exercise with me. And we're going to look at the impact that emotional intelligence has already had on you in your life, and therefore by implication on pretty much everybody in the world and on their lives. So I'm going to take you back in time just for a moment. And I want you to think of the best boss you ever worked for. Now, if you're young, good for you, and you've never had yet a boss that you would say was really great or a best ever boss, think of the best coworker or mentor that you ever worked around. And what I suggest is just write their name down on the top of your page. Write their name or their initials or whatever. It'll just get your mind thinking about them, because we're going to look back to how did they show up? What were they like? How did they behave? Now, in a few moments, I'm going to call out 6 behaviors, and I'm going to ask you how often did they display those behaviors? And to help you gauge that, you'll compare them to other people that you know. So you see down the bottom that we have, what would I call it, a rating scale that runs from 1 to 5. And it runs from significantly less than others, demonstrated this behavior significantly less than others, up to 5 demonstrates the behavior significantly more. So let's say, for example, if, let's say is a very funny person, tells very funny stories. If that was one of the behaviors and you were thinking of your best ever boss, if this was a person who was endlessly cracking jokes, making puns, telling stories, and seeing the bright side, well, then you'd think they do that more than other people, I'll give them a 5. If they were people that were humor bypass, never told a story, funeral director type personality, you might say that they were more like a 1 because they demonstrated that behavior significantly less than others. So obviously, telling stories and being humorous is not one of the behaviors we want to work with. I'm going to read those out to you. I'm going to take the first one and give you an example of it. And then we'll go through the other 6 fairly quickly, or 5 fairly quickly. So the first one, to what extent did that person demonstrate awareness of their mood and their emotions? I was in a meeting a while ago with our CFO, MJ, and during that meeting, we knew there was going to be a little bit of friction. There was a little bit of a disagreement going on, so we were obviously well prepared. We walked into the meeting, we sat down, we did what everybody does in the world, talked about the weather, talked about the traffic, and so on. And just when the meeting was getting to that point where it was starting to heat up, because we were getting to the point where people, where the point of disagreement was, and the temperature was starting to go up, my colleague excused herself to the bathroom. And I'm sitting on one side of the table, 3 people sitting on the other side of the table, and we've just started into the frictional, challenging part of the conversation. And you can imagine, it kind of felt like swinging in the wind, and I just wonder, what the hey, where's she gone to suddenly? 2-3 minutes into the session. Anyway, she came back in after a couple of minutes, we carried on. And at the end of the session, when we were talking about it, she said, look, I had to leave the room at that point, just for a moment, because some of the things that people were saying were getting me so wound up, getting me so angry, getting me so triggered, that I really thought that I might say something that I could end up regretting. So I decided just to leave the room, take a few breaths. In fact, what she said was, her mom always told her, when you start to get triggered, go to the bathroom and run cold water over your wrists. My mom always told me, count to 10 or take a deep breath. But either way, she demonstrated a great awareness of her mood and emotions. She knew she was getting angry. She knew she was likely to blow, and that gave her a choice. She was able to avoid doing that. So think back to your best boss and tell me, to what extent did he or she demonstrate awareness of their mood and emotions. 5 is very high awareness. 1 is very low, and it might be somewhere in between. So please just give it a score now from 5 down to 1. 5 is high, 1 is low. So let's look at the other 5 behaviors, and they're much easier. To what extent did this great boss make other people feel appreciated? And that could be as simple as, good morning, how are you? Noticing people, saying hello to them, saying please, saying thank you. But you know what I mean when I say, did they make you feel appreciated? 5 is, they made everybody feel appreciated all the time. 1 is, they made nobody feel appreciated any of the time. So please give them a score now. Were they a 5, were they a 1, or were they somewhere in between? To what extent was this best boss open and honest about mistakes? So when they screwed up, did they mea culpa, terribly sorry, I dropped the ball, or were they the sort of person who looked for somebody to blame? 5 is, terribly sorry, screwed up, dropped the ball. 1 is, who can I stitch up for this? So give that best boss ever a score. 5 is high, 1 is low. 4th one, to what extent did they do the honest, the straight, the ethical thing? So when they had the decision to make, where there was a question of whether one would do the right thing or the wrong thing, and the wrong thing was easier to do, did they make the right, the correct, the moral decision? 5 is scrupulously honest, did the right thing every time. 1 is, did the slippery thing, the easiest thing. So when MJ, sitting in that meeting, realized that she was getting triggered and she left the room, she managed her emotions very effectively in that difficult situation. You and I and your best boss got angry, got sad, got anxious, got upset, got fearful at times. To what extent did they manage those emotions effectively so that they just kept going? 5 is like MJ. 1 is the sort of person that when you walk in the office, the first thing in the morning you say is, what sort of mood is she in? If your boss was what sort of mood is he in? Well, then it's a 1. If it was more like MJ, it's a 5. And then finally, recognizes others' hard work and achievements. And I think the gold standard of recognition is catch somebody doing something right in front of their colleagues and call them out and give them praise. So 5 is they did that for everybody as much as they could. 1 is they did it for nobody ever. So you've just given 6 of those behaviors a score of 1 to 5. So you've got something, if you add those up, you'll have a score that runs somewhere between 6 and 30. And we're going to come back to that in a moment. Now, let me just get you guys up in front of me. You'll notice that there is a hands up feature on the chat, in the chat box. So let me ask you, give me a hands up if you know somebody who, when they walk into the room, they suck the energy and the positivity and the energy and the positivity out of the room. Do you know anybody, and when they walk in, the room is just, it's a downer? Yeah, all the hands are going up. Everybody knows that. An old boss of mine used to call those people psychic vampires. He said, Derek, there are people walking around with an umbilical that they want to plug into positive people like you and I. They suck all the positivity out of them. They don't feel any happier, but you feel a great deal more negative. There are people who, by emotional contagion, just by entering a room, they suck the energy and the positivity out of them. So let me put down those hands again, and let me ask you a different question. Do you know anybody who is the exact opposite, who, when they walked in the room, things are just a bit better? They make you smile. It becomes a bit warmer and polite. Yeah, all the hands going up again. And you're seeing that person in your mind, right? Because the way we show up and the way we behave really directly impacts the way people feel. It's called emotional contagion. So I want you to think of your best boss. Bring your mind back to your best boss. And let's imagine that, say it's a Sunday night, and you're thinking, or a Saturday night, depending on where you are in the world, and you're thinking of going into work the following day after the weekend. How did you feel around that person? How did they make you feel? So what I'd like you to do is think, how do those people make you feel? And just write down over the next 15 seconds, I'm going to get my timer going here, just write down 3 words that describe how they made you feel. Write it down on your page. they made me feel disappointed, sad, and anxious, or they made me feel happy, upbeat, whatever. Just 3 words. I'll give you a couple of seconds there. How did they make you feel? What was it like to be around them? Okay, good. Then a final question. Okay. Now, this is an expression you may or may not have heard of, discretionary effort. I know that you've heard of employee engagement. Employee engagement is the extent to which people want to do the jobs they're doing. And when people are engaged, all of the research says productivity is higher, commitment is higher, profitability is higher. Well, Gallup used the expression discretionary effort to describe that extra effort that we give when we're doing a job with which we're engaged. So it's the extra mile, I'll often say. It's the extent to which we go the extra mile. And for some people in some jobs, we go the extra mile. So what I'm going to ask you to do is think about how much did that boss motivate you to go the extra mile. Now, I don't want you to think how hard did you work in that job. I just want to tell me on a scale that runs from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, how much did they motivate you to do the very best you could? 1, 2, 3 is a low score. I was only there for the check. They had no motivational impact on me. And 8, 9, 10 is I would have run through a brick wall for that person. The sorts of things you say, if it's an 8, 9, 10, is I did some of the best work I ever did with those people or that person. They helped me do things I didn't even know I was capable of. So give them a score. 8, 9, 10 is high, 1, 2, 3 is low. So that's the bright side. I apologize, but I'm going to the dark side. And if I could see your face, if you were doing this in front of a group of people and you asked them to think of the worst ever boss that they had, you can see their mood drop in their face. You possibly felt your mood dropping depending on the experience that you had. And please write their initials or the name at the top of the paper, because we're going to do the same exercise with them really, really quickly. So what I want you to do is think of, to what extent did that worst boss you ever worked for demonstrate awareness of his or her mood and emotions? 5, extreme awareness, knew exactly when they were being triggered. 1, absolutely none. They were like a firework, light the blue touch paper and stand clear. 2, makes others feel appreciated. 5 is they did it for everybody all the time. And 1 is nobody ever. So give them a score. To what extent was that worst boss open and honest about mistakes? 5 is high and 1 is low, once again. Write down a score. To what extent did they do the right thing, the moral thing, the correct thing, even when it was difficult to do so? So did they make ethical decisions? 5 high, 1 low. Were they the firework or were they the Zen master? Now, don't get me wrong. Every single person on this planet gets triggered. Now, there's always a choice. It may not feel like it in the moment. There's always a choice when you're triggered. 1 is follow the emotion. And anger, boom, explode, get angry, and inhabit the feeling. The other one is understand it, manage it, and work and push on through. Did this person push on through, or did they get lost in the feeling? So 5 is they pushed on through. You knew they were stressed, but they kept functioning. 1 is they exploded or they gave into it. And finally, to what extent did they give recognition? You know, did they recognize others' hard work and achievements? So once again, you should have a score when you add that up that goes somewhere between 6 and 30. And it's not unusual in live sessions for people to say, hey, can I give a negative score on this one, or can I give a 0 score on this one? So if you did end up with less than 6, which you shouldn't, I understand what the message you were giving was. So once again, it's Sunday night. And you're thinking about working with this person who was the worst boss you ever worked for. Please, next 15 seconds, write down 3 words to come into your mind to describe how you feel or how you felt around them. How did they make you feel? Okay, finally, for this chap or chapess, to what extent did that person motivate you to go the extra mile? Not how hard did you work, not how much work did you do, because most people work as hard as their values tell them they should. So I want you to say, to what extent did they turn you on or off? 1, 2, 3 was they had no effect on increasing my motivation. 8, 9, 10 was I always wanted to do the best I could for them. So give them a score. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the list of you guys up here in front of me on the chat. Where is my chat? Just one second. Here we go. And I'm going to just debrief this very, very quickly. And I'm going to ask you, and for this to be successful and to work well for you and work well for me, what I need to do is ask you to interact with me. So here's how we're going to do this. Tell me, what was the score that you gave your best boss? So please enter it into the chat line or into the chat box right now. What score did you give your best boss? So there's a 27 from Johan, 28 from Annette, 29, 24, 28, 26, 27, 25, 21, 29. And thank you very much. And if we stayed on here long enough, what you'd see is the same trend as you see when we do that absolutely anywhere in the world, any culture, any language group, anything, no matter what they do. If you're looking in the chat box, you're probably seeing, or you are seeing, that the scores are running somewhere from a low of 21 up to a high of 29. Just out of curiosity, if anybody put in a 30, will you re-enter it again? I'm just curious if there are any 30s in there, because you get an occasional 30. But generally speaking, what you get is a range of scores that go from north of 20, typically though, more north of 25. And if I was to average these scores out, I'm probably getting something that's coming in around 25, 26, 27. I'm not a mathematical sort of person. But just notice that the best boss is scoring an average that's somewhere around 25, 26. Now let's go to the Darth Vader of your boss world. What was the worst boss like? What scores did you give the worst boss? So we got a 9, we got a 13, we got a 15, a 12, an 11, 10, 19. Okay, let me do this, and thank you very much for those. Anything lower than 9, if you've already put it in, pop it in again anyway. Anything lower than 9. So there's a 6 coming up, okay? A 7, an 8, an 8, another 8. Anything higher than 15, just pop the 15. If you have anything higher than 15, there's a 14. 17, okay, there's a 17. Oh, there's a 19 in there as well. Now, for the most part, when I look at these scores, in general, with nearly every group, where regardless who you do it with in the world, the worst boss will tend to come out, excuse me, very low double figures, typically, or very often into single figures. And I've got a range here that goes from 6 up to 19. There are 2 there, sort of 17 and 19, they're outliers. And I'm really pleased for the folks who got 17, 18, 19, because it means that your worst boss actually wasn't all that bad. They were actually pretty okay. And they showed up in a way that was pretty okay. We'll see what I mean by that in a moment. But if I took those outliers out and I looked at the others, I've got an average score that's coming in around 9 or 10. So the average for the best one was around 25, 26. And the average for the other one is 9 or 10. And the only observation I want you to make right now is that all you did was think, how did they show up? How did they behave? How did I see them behave? And it was very, very different. They're very distinct. There was more than a 2-to-1 disparity between them. So let's move on and just open this up a little bit more and say, oh, wrong mouse, and say, how did your best boss make you feel? Give me a couple of words for this. Now, apologies, it's going to go very quickly, so I won't grab all of your words, but pop in maybe the, okay, valuable, energized, comfortable, happy, motivated, empowered, capable, appreciated, interested and valued, trusted and appreciated, relaxed, special, respected, motivated, valued, welcome, inspired. You see those going up in front of you. These are really, let's put it this way, very simply. When the organization hired that person, they hired somebody who delivered, because they hired them to engage you, and they made you feel valued, empowered, fortunate, empowered and energized, happy, motivated, comfortable, just so many things. And these are the words we get. Whether you're doing it through a simultaneous translator in China or Russia, or you're doing it in Africa, or you're doing it in Europe, it doesn't matter. We're all humans. And the way we show up has a big impact on the way people feel. And if you doubted that for a minute, why don't you share with me the top word out of those three that you gave the worst boss that you ever worked for? How did they make you feel? Irritated, dread, stupid, worthless, despondent, uncertain, uncomfortable, strange, intense, dirty, frustrated, annoyed. Holy God. Now, you know, in those words, you really feel the experience that people had working with that person. And look at the difference so far. I mean, what we're looking at so far is the best boss made you feel valued, energized, comfortable, happy, motivated, excited, capable. The worst one, and I just have a few: angry, scared, ill, anxious, demoralized, sick, irritated, dreadful, worthless, and I think that's despair down the bottom, anxious. And by the way, the biggest problem we have in the working world today is one of anxiety and stress. We do not need to go to work to get, oh, now there's one, somebody said suicidal. And that comes up every so often. In fact, in one of the sessions a while ago, somebody said, like, killing me or her. And people kind of giggle when you say that, and yet they giggle because it's uncomfortable, because they understand exactly where they're coming from. The way you show up can have a dramatic impact upon people. So what I want you to notice so far is the person who scored really high on demonstrating those behaviors that we had there made you feel valued, energized, comfortable, happy, and motivated. So the way they showed up very much determined in large part the way you felt. The person with the low scores and didn't demonstrate those behaviors made you feel irritated, dreadful, suicidal, demotivated, sick, anxious, and so on and so forth. So there's a very big difference between them. And the key thing is, we all see it. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be as complicated as emotional intelligence is often made out to be. It is simply about the way we show up. One final question, and then we'll move on. What was the number you gave for the extent to which your best boss motivated you to do the best? To what extent did they make you want to do the very best you could? What did you get for that? 10, 8, 9, 8, anything lower, 7, anything lower than 7, 9, 4, okay. 10, 10, 10. Okay, I wish I was actually on a microphone, which I'd really love to know what the background the 4 was. But basically what we got is we got a range that runs from 7 to 10, and most of them are 10s, 9s, 8s, as you can see. Tell me about the Darth Vader character. What about the worst boss you ever worked for? What numbers? There's a 4, there's a 5, there's a 1, there's a 0, there's a 2, 2, 3, 3, 0, 0. I think going by, so most of them are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The majority, the vast majority are 1, 2, 3. And I think I saw a 10 going by. And I'd love, again, if I was face to face with you, I'd love to explore it, because very often what people say is, that person irritated me so much, made me feel so bad that I went out of my way to drive myself to do the best job I had ever done. And as soon as I'd done that, I left. And that's very frequently, people are motivated by a demotivating boss in the short term. And then when they get close to the point of burning out, after they've proven what they're capable of, they move on. And here's the message I want to give you, is that the way you show up, Aoife just said to me, that wasn't a 10, Deiric, that was a minus 10. Okay, so thank you for clarifying, Aoife. So that was a minus 10. Thank you, minus 10. The bottom line is, the way you make people feel is critically important. And that's all. People get into complicated explanations of what emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence is having the awareness to be able to manage the way we show up so that we manage the way we make people feel, because that has a tremendous impact on everything. Here's the mantra that I often train people in our certification. I say to them, just remember, and this is what you've just seen experimentally, it's what the research says as well. The way you show up, so the way you behave, just a simple way you behave, determines the way people feel. The way they feel determines the extent to which they engage. And the extent to which they engage determines everything about the outcome of that relationship. If you're a salesperson and you make people feel, what do we get? Irritated, dreadful, worthless, depressed, etc., you're not going to sell much. If you're a leader trying to lead people, you're not going to lead them very effectively. You're not going to engage them. But if you're making people feel valuable, energized, comfortable, happy, and motivated, like your great boss did, well, then you get positive results from people. And that's not just from the people you work with. That's from your spouse, from your children, from your friends, from everybody you ever interact with. The way you show up determines the way they feel. The way they feel determines the extent to which they engage, and that determines the outcome of the relationship. Emotional intelligence is managing the way you show up so that you get the best impact upon people. What you've just done, by the way, several of you have already gone through the assessment. By the way, I'm going to say this a few times before the end. It costs a little bit of money to do that assessment, and you're getting it at no cost. Take the opportunity, because you get an opportunity to look through the eyes of other people. How do they see you show up? But for those of you who've already gone through the assessment, you'll probably have recognized some of those items, because we took out of the Genos model, we took one item from each of the 6 scales. Now, each of the 6 scales, like self-awareness, has 7 items on it, and we just took one of those items out. So from self-awareness, which is the extent to which you're aware of your mood and emotions and the way they impact others, we took demonstrates awareness of their mood and emotions. From awareness of others, which is the extent to which you are aware of other people's emotions and feelings, and the extent to which is impacting the way they show up and the things they say and the decisions they make, we took one. And with all of the other 6 scales, we took just one item out of them. Now, and with that one item, you were able very easily, very quickly to score dramatically differently the best boss you ever worked for and the worst boss you ever worked for. And that's what the core of emotional intelligence should be. It should be looking at, how are you showing up right now? What behaviors are you demonstrating that are working because you want to keep demonstrating? What ones are not serving you well? Now, with the best boss and the worst boss, it's very binary. It's very polarized. So we purposely picked, binary opposites, polar opposites. When you're looking at you and I and most people in the world, we're somewhere in between those poles. So that's why when we have 7 different behaviors under each of those scales, we get much more resolution on what's going well, what might go, could go better. So let us now look. That's what emotional intelligence is. That's the way to understand it. Now let's look at the neuroscience behind it. And to do that, first I'm going to start and give you a little bit of the anatomy of the brain and where it's put together, and where it's located. And I'm going to use a model called the hand model of the brain that was designed by a Dr. Dan Siegel in the United States. Now, as you're watching me, and if you're not in an open office where you're going to look like you've lost your mind, you could hold your hand up like that. And holding your hand up like that, I want you to imagine that this is your brain. So this is just like me. This is my brain. It's facing forward. And in fact, let me just click this down. There we go. The mouth would be there. So here's your brain. Your mouth is kind of located down there. If we go beneath the skin and we go inside, the arm is really like the extension of the spinal cord. So you got the spinal cord, which is feeding up into the brain. Okay. Now, at the very base of that brain is the oldest part of the brain, often called the reptile brain. It's the brain stem. And it's the part of the brain that was really basically responsible for survival. And it runs all of your autonomic functions. So this is responsible for keeping your breathing, keeping your heart beating, keeping your respiration going, for sweating. All of those things we do without even spending a bit of time thinking about it. This is the part of the brain that continues to function even when people have been severely head injured, and when we say their brain dead, and yet they're breathing and their heart is beating and so on and so forth. That's the part of it. It's the basic part of the brain that was responsible for keeping you alive, saving you from threats, and keeping your heart beating and so on. If you go deeper into the brain, so you open up your hand like this one, well then in the middle here, and the shape is actually quite similar to this, you've got the emotional brain. That part of the brain developed much later than the reptile brain, and it's the part of the brain that is often called the mammalian brain. It's the part that makes us tribal, makes us capable of feeling for our young and nurturing our young and so on and so forth. Reptiles don't give a sugar. As soon as the eggs are laid, they go on their merry way. We, on the other hand, tend to nurture our young and raise them, and we tend to be tribal and so on and so forth. And that part of the brain is really, it's the emotional brain. Working in concert with this autonomic brain or the reptile brain, it is responsible for a lot of the way you respond to the world. So it developed a little bit later, so it's deeper in the brain. And then when you close down the hands again, what you're closing over the top here is the latest part of the brain to develop. So it's the wrinkly sort of part that you see when you look at the pictures of the brain that's wrapped around the outside. And where we're really interested in is this part just behind the forehead, just here on the knuckles. Okay? So just here on the knuckles is the prefrontal cortex, and that's the part of the brain that essentially makes us Homo sapiens, makes us capable of planning, creating logic, strategizing, and gives us a personality. It's the part of the brain that often gets damaged in car accidents where somebody doesn't have a seatbelt on, and where they have this dramatic personality change because it's right there is where you and I live. So that's where our thinking brain is. That's where we, if you like, live. So that's the part of the brain that responds when you see somebody doing something under the influence of emotions, and you think, oh my God, what was she thinking saying that to the boss? That's the part of the brain you're working with, and that's the part of the brain you think she should be working with, but in actual fact, what's going on is this part of the brain is in control, and we'll look at that in a moment. One other thing I want to talk to you about are two neurotransmitters, two chemicals that have a very important role for us in our brains as we go about the world, particularly as we go around trying to engage and work with people and we talk about emotional intelligence. And the first one is oxytocin. And oxytocin is often referred to as the trust hormone. It is the chemical that was injected into your brain for the first time when your mama picked you up after you were born. And it's called the trust or the bonding hormone. It makes us want to trust people, to bond with them, to become closer with them, to consider them to be part of our tribe and part of our group. Every time we touch somebody, particularly mostly when the touch is welcome, that touch induces a little injection of oxytocin. When we interact with people, it can also inject a little bit of oxytocin if that's a positive interaction. Now, the other end of the scale, and there are lots more neurotransmitters, these are just the two main movers that we want to talk about because they explain a lot about the way your best boss and your worst boss worked and the effect they had on you, is cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. When you get a fright, let me see. Ah! Okay. I hope you got a little bit of a fright there, and I'll tell you what happened there in a moment. I just gave you a fright, and you just suddenly got your system, your mammalian brain, this part down here, reacted. And one of the things that happened as part of that was you got a little injection of cortisol. That cortisol is what puts you on edge, and in conjunction with adrenaline and a couple of other things to go on there, it gets you into that fight or flight mode, where in that moment when I screamed at you, you were ready either to run away or to hit me. I'm glad I'm not sitting with you face to face. Trust hormone comes from positive interactions with people that we like and trust and we bond with. Cortisol comes from situations and people that are the opposite, that stress us. So it's obvious that our best boss tended to induce into us more oxytocin than they did cortisol. Now, don't get me wrong. Remember, and you know this, sometimes you do your best work under stress. You tell me if I was face to face with you, say, God, you know what, Deiric? Sometimes it's when I'm under the hammer, it's an hour before the presentation, I do my best work. And that's right. Certain amount of cortisol balanced with that oxytocin in a relationship is a very positive thing. Your best boss probably gave you challenging goals, put you on edge, kept your feet to the fire, but kept all of those other positive messages going. Because, and the reason that worked is that they had a greater balance of oxytocin induced into you over a period of time. You are programmed to respond with more oxytocin than cortisol to the best boss. And so the cortisol, which diminishes the response to oxytocin, wasn't doing any damage. Think of the worst boss. When they walked into the room, and you put your hand up earlier on, somebody walks into the room, what are you having? What's making you go there? It's not your thinking mind that thinks, oh, I don't like them, I feel sad. What's going on there is your emotional brain is reacting. You're being injected with a bit of cortisol that's topping up the cortisol that you got from them before, and you're programmed to react with them in that sort of stressful way. So those are two very important movers. So let's look at how they play out when we look at the way the brain works. And this is you and me and everybody in the world. And let me just grab a couple of pens here. And by the way, I don't want you to do this at home, but if you were to stick a pen in your ear, in fact, if you were to stick a pen in each of your ears, okay, and then stick another pen through your eye, where those two pens crossed, there would be right in the middle of that emotional brain, there's a little almond-shaped organ that I'm sure you've heard of called the amygdala. And the amygdala is like the smoke alarm of the brain. It was what was triggered when I screamed at you a moment ago. If you felt stressed or you jumped, it was what was triggered. It said, there may be a threat here. Absolutely. Here's the key point. Every stimulus, any thought you think, any word you say to yourself, any word somebody else says to you, anything that happens that stimulates you makes its way to your thinking brain via the emotional brain. Everything but everything is filtered through the emotional brain. You may think you're totally objective and totally rational. Believe me, if you're human, you're not. So every decision you make is valenced or balanced or weighted by emotions. It passes through the emotional brain, and the emotional brain says, is this a danger? Is this a problem? Can I eat this with it, or is this going to eat me? Do I need to get away from this? Do I need to fight? It has only two responses. One of them is danger. And danger can come from, in the old days, it would have come from saber-toothed tigers and higher order predators. But today, in our modern world, it can come from things like feeling your status has been pushed down, fear that you're going to be conned or tricked, lack of security, lack of security, loss of control, unfairness. Any of the things that your boss did to you put you into threat mode. And when they put you into threat mode, your body got an injection of cortisol. And the more they put you into threat mode, the more cortisol there was around them. So the more time you spent around them, the more tense you started to become. And tense people, loaded with cortisol, in danger or threat mode, disengage. They close off and they become evasive. And if you doubt me, think of the last time when you were really, really stressed. And the one you love, your husband, your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, somebody said to you, is everything okay? You said something, and I'm paraphrasing, like, leave me alone, I need to work this through. At the very time when you needed somebody more than ever, you disengaged, you pulled away, you closed, and your ability to see opportunities closed down. Because when things are going really bad and we're stressed, all we can see is the fact that things are going bad, and we become focused upon it. All we can see is they're going bad, and they're going to get worse, and I'm never going to pull out of this. And this is all happening in a blink of an eye. Somebody says something in the middle of a presentation, somebody says something or looks at you strangely, your emotional brain processes in a second, cortisol is released, but more importantly, it sends that message onto the thinking brain, and it takes a finite amount of time. When it gets to the thinking brain, it's saying, we have detected a threat. That affects your feelings, your decisions, and the extent to which you engage. If you've ever met somebody for the first time and you thought, I don't like them, look at what happened next. It may be a completely irrational thing, but look at what happened next. Already your thinking was biased towards decisions and ideas and more open to being confirmed that they're not trustworthy or don't like them. Something in you abreacted to them. And it may have been a good thing that came from your emotional memory, or it may be just a mistake. But either way, by the time that message got to the brain, you were biased against them. That's what the best boss did to you or worst boss did to you all the time. The best boss, on the other side, triggered the only other response, and that's the reward response. And so they triggered you with things like trust, and you said they made me feel energized, comfortable, happy, motivated, etc. So by providing you with a level of trust, by being trustworthy, by providing you certainty, reliability, approval, sense of belonging, etc., they triggered you into a positive mode. they triggered more oxytocin in your brain than there was cortisol. And so you tended to engage more. You tend to become more connected. You tend to see more opportunities. And that's why when you look at that simple experiment we did, you saw that the best boss and the way they showed up directly impacted the way you felt and the extent to which you engaged. And that, as I say, is emotional intelligence. It's understanding, it's understanding what you intuitively know and what the neuroscience research says. We are programmed as humans to minimize threats and maximize rewards. We move away and we disengage from threat. People are a source of threat response, and we move towards reward response. Emotional intelligence is having the intelligence to understand that you and everybody else make your decisions based upon not just the rational, hard, objective facts, but on how you feel about situations. And then it's managing the way you show up so that you get the desired response in other people. So it's not about the way you do things. It's not about techniques. It's not about processes. It's not about how you do things or how you're doing things. It's about how you go about being, how you show up to people. So if you're a coach, a consultant, or a trainer, and your job is to help an executive, a salesperson, a customer salesperson, whatever it happens to be, to develop higher emotional intelligence, to get the sort of engagement that we're talking about, that gets the sort of results that we've been talking about from people around them, well, then what do you need to know? Well, there are lots of things, but let me summarize it down to 2 or 3. And the first thing, you must know, and I think this is really critical, you must know how people show up to themselves right now. Now, that might sound strange. In the beginning, I said, we talked about the best boss and the worst boss and the way they showed up and the impact that their behavior had upon the way you felt and the impact that had upon the engagement. Well, you know what? Sometimes inside our heads, we are our own worst boss. And everything we say to ourselves, everything we think about ourselves, every belief we have about ourselves, and the patterns that we continually repeat in our beliefs about ourselves impact the way, the extent to which, the way we feel, and the extent to which we engage with ourselves, the way we show up. So the first thing we need to know really is, how do they show up to themselves right now? How do they deal with themselves? The second thing, obviously, is how do they show up to others? And that's like the good boss, bad boss. So as you're doing your report, you're looking through the eyes of some of your colleagues to look at, how do they see me show up to them? You know, so what is it that I am doing right now that really makes them feel motivated, engaged, and makes them want to go the extra mile? And what are the things that I'm not seeing me doing that if I did them would make them more engaged and engage more with me? So first, at a basic level, we need to know, how do they show up to themselves right now and how do they show up to others? And then we need to look at the disparities. The first one, let's talk about the showing up to oneself. Some people look at themselves through rose-colored glasses. And interestingly, not as many as you'd think. Because we are programmed to be more negative than positive, it's a survival mechanism. A friend of mine says that we're descended from nervous monkeys, because only nervous monkeys were jittery and ran at the slightest sense of threat, survived to breed, and bred and bred and bred and bred and bred. And so only those ones survived, so that the accident of your birth and my birth occurred. So we tend, in general, most of us, to be harder on ourselves than we need to. But there are some people out there who look through rose-colored glasses and they say, I am just wonderful. I do everything perfectly. We want to be able to look at that. We want to be able to look and see it. How do they think they show up? And how do people see them show up? How do they show up to the world? How do they think they show up to the world? Are they looking through rose-colored glasses? And just as importantly, and I would argue in some cases even more important, are they looking through black-colored glasses? Are they looking at it and saying, I'm a failure, I'm useless, I'm never good at that, I'm not good with people, and whatever it is they might be saying to themselves, it has the exact same impact upon raising that oxytocin level. If you have that black-colored glasses devil sitting on your shoulder, giving you negative messages into your ear all day long, it's very hard to show up as your best self. So that's the, you need to know those disparities. And then you need to know what's the edge. Now, I mentioned to you earlier on that in the report you've been invited to do, there are 6 scales, 6 aspects or competencies of emotional intelligence. In each of those scales, there are 7 items, 7 behaviors. And what's really interesting when you look at emotional intelligence is every one of those behaviors touches every other of those behaviors. And in everybody's results, there is always one behavior in there or 2 that are absolutely glaringly obvious in need of being considered, that they need to recognize, here's the way people see me show up. Here's the impact they're having upon them. And that if they change those 1 or 2, it changes everything. Because when you change one aspect of your self-awareness, you tend to have a ripple effect on every aspect of your self-awareness, which tends to affect your awareness of others, which tends to affect your authenticity. So what you need to know to be able to coach people is, 1, how are they showing up right now? What are the things that are serving them or not? And what are the 1 or 2 behaviors that if they spent some time developing those and changing those would make the change? I don't have it at hand. One of the things that I often use as an analogy is it's like a kaleidoscope. When you were a child, perhaps you had one of those little small kaleidoscopes that Santa tended to bring in the stocking. And it was a tube of cardboard, probably very colorful, probably made in Hong Kong, that had a triangle of mirrors down the middle and a mirror in the bottom and lots of beads inside. And when you looked through the lens, what you saw was the reflection of each bead in the end mirror and the reflection of that bead in this mirror and the reflection, and so on. And what the game, if you like, was with the kaleidoscope was you'd look through it and you tried to turn it the smallest amount you could so that just one bead would move. And when one bead moved, the entire pattern changed. Here, we are always looking, what are the 1 or 2 edges? What are the 1 or 2 behaviors that if this person moved them would make that shift? And that's one of the things that we help you to develop from this report. So again, I'm going to say it again. And I by the way, this is something which we're giving to you at no cost. There's no hidden trick in this. If you haven't done the assessment already, do. Because what we're going to show you when you have your report is, how do you find that single edge? How do you find that in yourself? Because once you've found it in yourself, you can find it in others. And by the way, short time after we send the report to you, AFA will send you this development tips workbook, which is a book that has a series of development tips for each of the 42 behaviors in there. So do yourself a favor, get a snapshot of what's going on there. Now, once you know all of this, let me see. Once you know this, what do? There are lots of things. I'm not going to teach anybody who's on this call how to coach. That's not what we're about in here. Once you know this, what can you do? We're into classic coaching, helping people to identify the who, what, where, when, why of their behaviors and figure out how to show up in a different way. But you know, there are some other ways that you can start right away and that you can coach people to start right away, showing up in a more emotionally intelligent way by helping them to understand what I've just shared with you on the neuroscience, and then using a model that was developed by a gentleman called David Rock. And David Rock wrote this excellent book, Your Brain at Work, and it is an absolutely outstanding piece of work. It follows 2 people through their lives, a husband and a wife. The wife has just started a new job as the human resources director of an organization. The husband has just started a new business. And the first chapter is about the lady, the second chapter, the man, first chapter, the lady, or third chapter, the lady, fourth one, the man, and so on. And the first half of each chapter is what happened in their world. And the second half is what happened in their brain when what happened in their world happened. And it is a really superb book if you want to dive deeply into this. But the same man created this model called the SCARF model from looking at a meta-analysis of over 20 years of brain research into what triggers us into desirable or undesirable, into threat or reward states. And he came up with 5 factors that our brain is unconsciously monitoring the environment for all of the time. Your brain, my brain, with the view to minimizing and maximizing reward. And those factors are status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. I'm going to give you examples of each, but if you approach people with the knowledge that these are the 5 factors that trigger people either positively or negatively into a reward or a threat status, well, and you're conscious of showing up in a way that you don't press negatively against each of these factors, well, then already you're behaving more emotionally intelligent, even if you haven't changed anything else. So let me give you an example. Status is the importance of us, the way we see our importance relative to others. And what's interesting about the research is that the brain research, and there's some great stuff by a Dr. David Eagleman, shows that an increase in status generates a larger response in your brain than an increase in your salary. And a decrease in status triggers the same part of the brain that is triggered when you're in physical pain. It's a painful thing to have your status demeaned, to feel put down. So a general guideline is, when you're around people, always be conscious, how can I show them what's great about them? And how can I genuinely acknowledge and recognize what's great about them? Always be aware as well that anytime that somebody feels their status is put down, when somebody goes above their head to the boss, when somebody reduces their title, when you call their skills into question, they're in threat mode. When they're in threat mode, they're in cortisol mode. When they're cortisol mode, they're going to respond the way you responded to the worst boss. The second one is certainty. And our brains are certainty-seeking machines. We need to know what's coming next. It goes back to our ancient ancestors, where we lived in caves because we needed predictability. We needed to know that we could see everything that was coming and we could eliminate threats. So our brain needs certainty. Any amount of uncertainty makes us uncomfortable. Any sort of ambiguity. So I'll give you, for example, I worked in an organization a couple of years ago that was taken over by a vastly larger organization. And immediately when a takeover like that happens, everybody wonders, oh God, what's going to happen to my job? What's going to happen to the organization? Will I still have a job tomorrow? And one of the clever things they did on day one, they recognized that, they called everybody together in a virtual global town hall meeting. And they said to people, we know everybody's concerned. And right now, frankly, folks, we don't know exactly what way this is going to go, or there will be some job loss. We don't know who they'll be. But we're doing our analysis, and in 90 days, we're going to be able to come back and tell you exactly what the strategy is and exactly what's happening. And all around me, all of my colleagues visibly settled. It wasn't that they were certain what was happening. They were just more certain. There was greater certainty. So anytime you can give people certainty about what you expect of them, the commitments you make them, the structures and how it works, anytime you make their environment predictive and certain, you make things better. So eliminate ambiguity. The autonomy is a sense of control over events. It's the extent to which we feel we have choice. Think of the last time you were stressed. The last time you were stressed, if you felt you had no choices, the stress was multiplied several times. When you found that there was something you could do and there was some way you could react, you started to settle down a little bit. When we experience stressors, the threat response is dramatically higher if we have no control. It's the same for everybody else. So even when it's not entirely possible to give people really clear control and autonomy over things, try to figure out how to give them any feeling of choice, give them options, give them autonomy, try to give them alternatives so that they have a sense of choice. It settles down that emotional part of the brain. Here is a really critically important one, the relatedness one. Every time we're around people, there's a possibility of oxytocin being induced into us. So when we shake hands with people, for example, that induces oxytocin into us. We need to feel that we are part of the group that we're moving through. If we don't, we're part of our group, they're part of their group, and strangers are a source of threat. People we don't know, people that are different, trigger a threat response in us. So imagine, Rock uses a great example. He says, remember the last time you went to a party and you walked in and you knew absolutely nobody. and you felt a little bit uneasy and unsettled, and somebody came over and shook hands with you and introduced themselves, and you got into a conversation, and 5 minutes later, you were cool. You were full of oxytocin. You felt that you were part of them. You were part of that group. They were no longer new people. So it means when you want to build trust with people, you need to demonstrate them. What do we have in common? You need to bring them together socially. You need to bring them together with shared goals. You need to press the flesh, and quite literally. So it means that relatedness is about building a sense that we're all in this together. And people often make the mistake of thinking, just because somebody works for the same company, that they all feel this sense of relatedness. In your organization, my organization, there are silos. And if we don't work on establishing relationships between people in those silos can start to house different tribes who feel differently about one another because they are threatened by them. Their emotional brain is threatened by them. The final one is a perception of fairness, and that is a perception of equal treatment and fairness. Every time I travel, if I'm traveling in economy class, which is most of the time, I take an emergency row seat. And I take an emergency row seat because the airlines tend to keep the luggage overhead empty, so that when you go on, you can put your bag up there because your bag can't be on the ground during takeoff and landing. So that gives me the comfort of not having to get into the stress of rushing with everybody else when they say this flight is ready for boarding. So I usually board in the last 3 or 4 people. On a recent flight, I was boarding in the last 3 or 4 people, and somebody came from behind me and they cut in 2 people in front of me. My seat was safe. The plane was going nowhere without me. I knew I had my bag up on top. I knew I had my leg room, and yet I found myself being triggered. I wanted to kill them. In the moment, I thought, that's just not right. Fairness. It was a sense of unfairness. Unfair interactions with others, unfair systems, unfair ways of being generated threat response. So we have to make people feel comfortable, we have to be fair with everybody, we have to be generous with everybody, and we have to be seen to do so. And one of the things that you'll hear me say an awful lot is that it's not enough to know how to behave in an emotionally intelligent manner. You've got to show up in an emotionally intelligent manner. Other people have got to perceive it. You've got to be seen to do it, because people must feel they're being treated fairly. So we're talking about just 5 factors. Let me just flick back, I beg your pardon. Those 5 factors. Anybody showing up tomorrow who is thinking and filtering the way they're dealing with people through these 5 factors is already behaving in a more emotionally intelligent manner. So there are lots of tools you can use in the coaching, training, consulting practice to be able to take that next step. And as I said earlier, it's very much about the way of being, the way you show up, the way you behave versus what you do. Because the way you show up determines the way people feel, and the way people feel determines the extent to which they engage. And then what you do and the way you do it becomes important. How do you go about harnessing this? Well, the first thing I would say to you is if you want to coach somebody for emotional intelligence, you really need to start working on yourself first. As Socrates said all those years ago, know thyself. And here I'm going to say it to you again. We make you a gift of the report. If you haven't signed up for it, let AIFA know and learn how you can be debriefed on it. Bottom line is, if you are in the business at all of helping people to increase productivity, engage millennials, manage multi-generational workforces, increase sales performance, or any of these other things, if you're in any business where you're helping somebody to show up in a way that engages people more, that they have to be effective with people, well, then emotional intelligence has a part to play. If any of what we've said today kind of resonates with you and you say, oh, that's interesting, I'd be curious about what that's all about, well, then you might be interested to know about becoming a Genos certified practitioner. And you can just reach out to AIFA and she'll give you some information. We're not hard sell people. If this sounds like something that fits into your business, AIFA can give you a link to this very quick, I think it's 19-minute video. It just tells you the way we work with people. So that brings us to, in a very timely way, to the end of the actual formal content of the session. And so I'm going to invite Aoife back in and ask her to share with me any questions that came up during the session. So,
So we had lots of great feedback saying the brain stuff is so interesting. This is fascinating. I think everyone really enjoyed that deeper dive into the neuroscience. So thank you, Deiric.
Great.
We did have one question, a kind of more of a coaching question. So this person shared, I'm coaching someone who does not feel safe to share because of past experiences and miscommunication. What can I do to help him trust and open up?
Yeah, I would look very, I think that's a great question, and it's a classic sort of coaching situation. We get people sitting in front of us who really do, they know, they want to be there, they want to be coached, they want the benefit, but they've been conditioned, they've been whipped so long by experience with bad boss type characters that they find it hard to let go. And I think when you're dealing with somebody like that, one of the really useful tools to have there is the scarf, because if somebody is failing to engage with you, if you're not engaging with somebody, or you feel there's a misconnection, when you analyze what's going on, you'll find that one or more of those factors is being threatened. So in this situation, it's probably, let me see, there's probably a sense of fairness. They've probably been treated unfairly previously. They probably haven't yet bonded with you. So, which is why as coaches, we do those contracting sessions and chemistry sessions, you know, to try and build up that trust with people and build up that relatedness. And I'd be working on one, the relatedness, you know, and making sure that I build a better connection with them. Second, I'd be enhancing the things that they do really well. So I'd be building up their status to help them with that. But I would look at which of those factors are being pressed upon. And some coaches don't like this, but I'm not averse ever to showing people the models I'm working with. So sometimes, depending on the circumstance, I might share with somebody and say, here's a scarf model, and here's what it says. And it says when some people are finding sessions like this triggering, it's because of one or more of those factors. Let's talk them through and just see what strikes you that might be one of those. But the other thing you can do, of course, as well, and I'll tell you, there is no more bonding experience any stronger, and that is put them through one of those assessments. And when you sit with somebody face to face and you take them through the process that we take people through, well, then by the end of that, they really have bonded with you because you've gone into very, very intimate and private areas. But thank you. Great question.
Perfect. Thanks, Deiric. And the same person shared uncertainty is his issue. Thank you. I've got it. Thank you.
I'll interrupt you. I just see, thank you, Jacob. The scarf analogy is mind-blowing. I feel informed. I tell you, every time I look at it, Jacob, and every time I think about it, it blows me away. I use that in merger situations. I use it in coaching situations. I use it in when teams are breaking down. It's a fantastic way of diagnosing, so it's a great tool. I'm sorry, Eva.
No, you're fine. Johan agrees with you there. Nice to bring in David Rock's work. We did have one person ask Deiric about adding potentially Turkish subtitles to the video. We don't have any plan right now to add subtitles to the recording, but is there anything that you can think of we could do?
Yeah, in fact, I'm wondering, are Cem and Banu are two partners, distributors in Istanbul, wonderful people, and they're usually on these sessions, and they were signed up. They might be signed up for the afternoon one. And we'll reach out to them because you're probably aware that YouTube can do an automatic subtitle into languages, including Turkish. It's far from perfect, but it's a lot better than not having anything. So Aoife, I saw, has taken a note. So we'll ask Cem and Banu if they would put it through YouTube, and then maybe just clean it up a little bit, and we'd be glad to make it available somewhere for you. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Okay, thanks, Deiric. Oh, it's not a problem at all. So we've no other questions at the moment. Oh, wait, we do. Sorry, flowing in there. Okay, you mentioned something interesting about working to prove self to a bad boss. I'm still struggling to work effectively with a bad boss I had 3 years ago. How can I develop a good lateral working relationship with them now?
Yeah, and that's always a challenge. And when I was talking there, what I meant was sometimes people will say, they say on the that engage on that extent to which they gave extra effort, they'll score it at a 9 or a 10 for the worst boss. And when you probe it, they'll say, yeah, I wanted to stick it to him. I wanted to prove to him that I was better than he thought I was. And so I worked harder than I ever worked before. And then we say, and what happened next? And usually what they say is, I left. I got out of that job. I couldn't take it. And it's really hard if that's not there, if somebody is determined not to show up in a sort of positive, emotionally intelligent way. I know this sounds, and it's probably going to sound a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? It'll come back to me in a moment, but it's probably not going to be the answer you want. But if you are showing up to that person in a proper, emotionally intelligent way, and you're showing up to them over a period of time in a way that you would expect would elicit the sort of response that we're talking about with the best boss, and that's not happening, there's probably not a huge amount you can do to change that, because the change has to happen with them. So then what you have to work on is your response to their response to you. And that's something that we cover a lot in our Mindful Leader program. It's completely free. It's one of these social responsibility programs. And it looks at how do you deal with the impact that other people being negative with you has upon you. Because the impact this is having is more, I don't want to say inside your head. Sorry, let me do it this way. The Buddhists have an expression, which I'll paraphrase. I probably won't have it perfectly. They say it's the second arrow that very frequently hurts you. They say the first arrow is the way somebody behaves. So let's say that bad boss is negative with you, approaches you in an emotionally unintelligent way, and that's bad, and that's an impact. But the second arrow is the way we react to that. And we say, why is he doing that to me? That's not fair. I can't imagine why a nice guy like me who gets on with everybody should be treated that way. And that's what I would suggest probably needs to be worked with more. And mindfulness is a fantastic tool for working with those difficult emotions. So if you want to sign up for the Mindful Leader program, or there's a book by a guy called Mark Coleman from Oxford University called Finding Peace in a Frantic World. And it's a 6-week program introducing people to mindfulness with practices, just like our Mindful Leader program. And it has some really good stuff on difficult emotions. But, you know, the really, you can't change other people if they don't want to change. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Deiric. Deiric, would you have any suggestions for what someone can do to bring back a client who's evading mentoring sessions?
Bring back a client who's evading mentoring. I would wonder, I don't want to sound like, you know, that thing they say, if a hammer is the only tool you have, every problem looks like a nail. But scarf is a wonderful one. I would wonder, why are they evading? First off, do they not need it? Maybe they just simply don't need it and they don't feel they're in a place. Or is there something in the dynamic, either that it's bringing up with them that they have to face that is pushing against their status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness? Or is there something in the relationship between you and them that is threatened there? So I'd sit down and I'd think, why is it happening? And I'd use the SCARF tool as a kind of a diagnostic to see what might be triggering them into that. And at the end of the day, sometimes I know, because, you know, sometimes I've withdrawn from coaching because I feel that I need to get some space and think and get some perspective on my own. And sometimes people just feel I need to take a step back and think about this. But I would just analyze, just to see, is there anything being threatened by the relationship between you and them? And is there anything being threatened by where you're going with them in the mentoring that is maybe opening up something else that threatens in some way? I hope that's some help.
Thank you, Deiric. Another point here, very informative session. Just to get your input on up-and-coming supervisors or people who are currently at supervisor level, how do you go about being more aware of EI and building good working relationships with the team, especially when you have been at the same level with them?
Yeah, that's really important. Let me tell you again. I'm going to go back to Scarf, but I won't stay exclusively with Scarf. When somebody by supervisor, it sounds to me like you're talking about somebody who's kind of first line. What would I call it? First line manager, if you like. So one step up from the troops on the ground, and it may be or it may not be the sort of first promotion. And very frequently, we get promoted into positions of supervision or management because we're good at doing what we're doing. So we're good technicians. Technically, we're able to do the job very well. So very frequently, people make the best salesperson the sales manager, they make the best widget maker the widget maker manager, and so on. And what very frequently happens is somebody moves into that position, they think, I don't know how to supervise. Oh, holy God, what am I going to do? And what they do instead is they fall back on the strengths they have. They fall back and they start looking at for example, they'll start giving people feedback, unsolicited feedback on how they should do their jobs better. When I was doing this job, here's the way I used to do it. That means their status sets off a threat response and boom, they're a million miles away from you. Secondly, new managers like that very frequently don't make expectations clear. And so they're not really clear on here's what I expect, here's the way it needs to be delivered, here's how we know it's there, and here's what's going to happen when you deliver that. The third one is being afraid of being seen to be more a buddy than a boss. New managers often push people away and become non-human. And so the relatedness thing disappears. And that's really a problem. If you were one of the guys this week and you're the boss next week, they're saying, who does he think he is? And so you can see, as you're analyzing what's going on there, you see that Scarf is, particularly in that situation, is very, very frequently impacted. But here's what I do, and I mean this sincerely. You put that person through a 180-degree assessment like the one you're going through. You have their colleagues feedback on them to tell them how they're showing up so that they get a sense of, here's what people are seeing. And I guarantee you in that situation, they're going to say, holy God, that's actually not the way I want to be. That's not the way I want to be seen. It's obviously the pressure of the new job. Now you're guiding them towards how do they want to be around these folks. That then becomes much closer between you as a coach and the supervisor. And if you're coaching yourself, by the way, you get a greater in-depth feeling of how are they seeing me and what do I need to change. So if it's for yourself and you're talking for yourself, make sure you do the report and make sure you get AFA to send you to the piece that walks you through creating actions to make some changes, because this could literally change your life.
Okay. Thank you, Deiric. Just two quick ones that I think I can take, Deiric. We've had a few people ask about how to get on the Mindful Leader program.
Okay.
We will send the link to that self-paced program in the follow-up. We also have some folks asking about getting the recording. Yes, we'll also be sharing that out with everyone probably in the next 24 hours. And then we've had some people ask about that really great information. I'd love to dive deeper into this. So we'll share out some links to the different research pieces that we have mentioned in the session today.
Yep.
Okay. Now, another one for you, Deiric. Is it possible to train equanimity and possible to assess it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Equanimity, for the sake of folks who are not familiar with the term, and I don't mean that in a patronizing way. It's just it's used very frequently by mindfulness folks, and it's really, and don't shoot me if I don't have it perfect, but it's really that state of acceptance where when things are going right, I recognize they're going right, but they may go wrong tomorrow, so I don't end up grasping it. And when things are going wrong, I recognize, yeah, they're going wrong, and I'll do what I can about them, but about it, and I don't try to push it away and resist it. So it's a state of acceptance, if you like, of whatever state you're in, and equanimity. I believe, from my personal practice, and I would say I am far from equanimous, and I am certainly no Zen master in the slightest, but I would say, in fact, I posted in our mindfulness and emotional intelligence group this week, I posted something that happened to me last week, and I won't go into the detail right now. You can go and read it if you wish, where I got a glimpse of a more equanimous me. So the first thing is, objectively, you can observe, oh, look, there's something that would have really got me angry and excited and triggered before, and it didn't this time. So you can see it objectively. Can you measure it? Yes, there is a scale for measuring mindfulness, but it's a self-assessed scale. I am desperately trying. Aoife, I'll put a link into the mail when I send it out. A lady in the United States, I've forgotten her name, and she gave me permission to use her mindfulness assessment a couple of years ago, and I set it up in SurveyMonkey as part of a project I was doing, and it looks at the extent to which you're equanimous and accepting of issues and so on and so forth. So, but it is very much an objective self-report. We often use it before and after meditation programs and things like that. So, yeah, thank you. Great question.
All right. Just some lovely comments, Deiric. Thoroughly enjoyed the webinar. Thanks so much. Some very great reminders. Another person said they'd be interested in exploring partnership opportunities. I will share that information out with you directly, and we'll share with the group in the follow-up. Another one from our friend Frederick in France. Thanks for a great session. Yeah, lots of thank yous, Deiric. You did a great job.
Thank you, and thank you to you all. And I don't mean to pick on one in particular, and I'm actually picking on Jacob again. But he said this webinar has been such a super way that I feel my time was well spent. Hey, Jacob, do me a favor. Tell me. In fact, no, we'll do it anonymously. I'm good. I'm definitely going to credit that. That is about the best. When you take people's time from them, that's just about the best feedback that you can get. I noticed one going by earlier on, and somebody talked about materials and resources for coaching. And if you get that link that AIFA has to the thing about our certification program, it talks to you about the very deep well of resources that we provide to coaches, consultants, and trainers for them to, take it from the point where you started coaching somebody specifically for emotional intelligence. So the answer is we have a shed load of that material, and yeah, we share it out quite liberally.
Perfect. And Leanne said it was worth staying up for, one of those late night owls. Thanks for joining, Leanne.
Hey, thanks, Leanne. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Folks, thank you very, very much. And for your really positive comments. I'm really absolutely thrilled. This is what makes it all worthwhile. AIFA will send you out the recording, send you out the links. If you find that we've missed anything, let us know. And keep an eye out. As I said, we have 3 more workshops coming up towards the end of the year. One is charismatic leadership and the part that EI plays in that. Another one is a 4-session piece on building
resilience.
Resilience. I got a brain block. Building resilience for a frantic world. And the third one is do I know where I'm going? And they're going to be. I think they're going to be 3 great sessions. So in the meantime, thank you very, very much indeed. And sorry, just as we're saying it, Chantal just said, do you have a copy of the webinar done earlier this year? Absolutely. AIFA's going to share that with you, Chantal. So once again, you have a great day, and I hope to see you back on here again. And who knows, we may even see you in certification one of these fine days. Have a nice day.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.